Wonderful. Let's go ahead and have our guests come in and join us for seats, please. What a wonderfully exciting day, and thank you for coming and joining. I'm Paul Rand with the University of Chicago, and thanks to all of you for coming and joining us today, and not only in the room, but around the world in terms of the webcast. We are here to celebrate the Nobel in Economics awarded this morning to Professor Douglas W. Diamond of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. We will begin this morning with remarks from university leaders and faculty and Professor Diamond, followed by a question and answer opportunities for members of the media. To begin our program, I'd like to introduce the president of the University of Chicago, Paul Alivisatos.
Well, good morning and welcome. What a wonderful day. And it's such a pleasure to be here to recognize Professor Douglas Diamond. As you know, earlier this morning, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences honored Professor Diamond, who is the Merton H. Miller Distinguished Service Professor of Finance at the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business, with the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel for 2022. We're delighted to celebrate his achievement. And today we're joined with Kai Lee, the provost of the university, and Madhav, Rajan, dean of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Professor Diamond is the 95th scholar associated with the university to receive recognition with the Nobel Prize, and the 33rd in economics. There are some other Nobel laureates from the university in attendance here. I see Lars Peter Hansen. Eugene, are you? Yes, there you are. You're right. Eugene Fama, Jack Shostak, and Michael Kramer. Welcome to all of you. Professor Diamond, you're joining the ranks of these amazing scholars. This morning, you had a call that completely changed your life. I had the chance this morning, at least as I was on the treadmill, to download the 1983 paper and start to read it. And it's a beautiful work of art. I can see why it received that recognition. It's truly seminal research on the role banks play in shaping our economy, particularly during financial crises. And he was cited by the Academy for his decades-long work to illuminate the critical dynamics underpinning the relationships between banking systems and borrowers. He's recognized, along with his collaborator, Philip Dybvig of Washington University in St. Louis, as well as you may have heard by Ben Bernanke of the Brookings Institution. I do want to just take a moment to say how special it is for the University of Chicago to celebrate with you today, and to say that this is really what the university in so many ways is all about. We are here in countless ways to address some of the greatest challenges that face society, but we also foster a culture of rigorous inquiry. And I can say that that 1983 paper embodies some pretty rigorous inquiry, but also it created a beautiful model where you could just see that there were some really essential points discovered. And that can only happen by being in a place where we truly encourage asking the right question. And you have to start from the right question to get there. And this is a community of individuals that really question assumptions and who care about the power of ideas and the freedom to engage in open debate, and who actively seek new discoveries that can change the way we understand the world around us and that will improve the quality of human life. Professor Diamond has been a leading contributor to that culture here at this university. Today, we are all delighted, and I'm especially so, to see him celebrated on the world stage for his amazing scholarly contributions. This Nobel is a richly deserved honor. Here to speak more about Professor Diamond's extraordinary contributions to the field of economics is Dean Madhav Rajan of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Madhav.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Chicago Booth, I'm thrilled to welcome all of you here to celebrate Professor Doug Diamond and to congratulate him on being awarded the 2022 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. Doug is a widely known and very esteemed finance scholar, teacher, and colleague, and his groundbreaking ideas literally created modern banking theory. His work and insights have had global impact and truly transformed the way that we think about banking. As Paul mentioned, Doug is best known for his study of financial intermediaries, financial crises, and liquidity. And his research agenda for the past 40 years has been to explain what banks do, why they do it, and the consequences of those arrangements. So going back to Doug's earliest research, it explained how the economic role of banks generated an essential link between the properties of their assets and the form of their liabilities. And the original paper was called Financial Intermediation and Delegated Monitoring, a paper from his PhD dissertation that appeared in the Review of Economic Studies in 1984. And there he showed that banks' special assets, and they're special because they monitor special information about business borrowers, force them to finance themselves with debt, liabilities like bank deposits rather than equity, and also led banks to diversify across many loans. Doug and his co-laureate Phil Dybvig then developed the Diamond-Dybvig model in bank runs, deposit insurance, and liquidity, and this appeared in the Journal of Political Economy in 1983. And the Diamond-Dybvig model demonstrates how banks that specialize in creating liquid liabilities, which is bank deposits, but then fund illiquid assets, which are business loans, that this gives rise to instability and potentially to bank runs. And it shows how the bank special liabilities combined with these illiquid assets explains the role of banks, why they may be unstable, and also why they may need a government safety net, such as deposit insurance, more than other borrowers might. And so this paper, which Paul also mentioned, is viewed as the canonical model of runs and banking crises. Doug has taught at Yale. He's been a visiting professor at MIT Sloan, at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the University of Bonn. He completed his bachelor's degree in economics at Brown in 1975, and then earned master's degrees in 76 and 77, and a PhD in economics in 1980 from Yale University. Doug has been at Chicago Booth since 1979, and at Booth he is the Merton Miller Distinguished Service Professor of Finance, which is an incredibly apt designation, just given the influence that Merton Miller had on Chicago Booth and on the field of finance as a whole. Doug is a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He's a fellow of the Econometric Society, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Finance Association. And he's also a past president of the AFA and the Western Finance Association. Doug has received numerous accolades for his work. Just give you a small sample. It includes the Morgan Stanley AFA Award for Excellence in Finance in 2012, the CME Group Mathematical Sciences Research Institute Prize in Innovative Quantitative Applications in 2016, and the Onassis Prize in Finance in 2018. It's really an honor to have Doug as a member of the Booth community. He truly exemplifies our mission, which is to produce knowledge with enduring impact and to influence and educate current and future leaders. We are thrilled for him and congratulate him on this well-deserved recognition of his contributions to the field of finance. And so with that, the 2022 Nobel Prize winner in economics, Douglas Diamond.
So apart from 2 years, I've spent my entire career at the University of Chicago. I came here from the economics department at Yale, which was quite a different place, very theory-oriented, not particularly free market-oriented. So it was quite a shock to come here, where free markets are well understood, and try to put together the two views of the world that I had now been exposed to. I came here in the Graduate School of Business at the time, now the Booth School, and at that point, I mean, finance has always been a strong point of this school. At that point, basically, Gene Fama and Mert Miller ran the shop and set the standard that we should all come in, at least 5 days a week, sometimes more. And my work was sort of subjected to very careful, detailed comments by all of my colleagues, and it sort of forced me to really think clearly about what I was doing and whether it made any sense. So Mert Miller was a theorist, and Gene Fama was probably 80% empiricist, later in his career 100%. Interesting thing was I ended up getting an office very near Gene Fama's in a very nice suite in our old Rosenwald Hall building. And basically the person on the faculty who gave me the most comments about my highly theoretical research was Gene. And he wasn't completely convinced by some of the arguments, but then I eventually won him over. So that's sort of just a nice little microcosm of why this is such a very nice place to do research. One other thing, so I had the two papers that were mentioned. The other paper, the first paper from my dissertation, was called Financial Intermediation and Delegated Monitoring. And one of the things that I didn't learn in graduate school was how to write a paper. So another one of my colleagues, Myron Scholes, who has since retired and moved on to other things besides academics for a while and then retired, he basically said, don't submit this paper as it is. There's a good paper hiding in there somewhere, but if you send it in, it's never. So my dissertation, which I finished in January of 1980, didn't get submitted until late 1982, as I tried to write it into a readable way. So if I'd written it the other way, I don't think they would have mentioned it in Stockholm. That's just another very University of Chicago-ish debt that I'm hoping to repay. So basically spent my career here, taught lots of MBA students over the years, lots of PhD students. My PhD students largely didn't do what I did. I sort of like to learn from my PhD students rather than cut off pieces of my body and share it with them. So that was a very nice thing. The other thing is basically the theoretical work that I do in finance is very policy-oriented, tries to be very practical, and you sort of need to know something about the world. So spending time teaching MBA students and having them question what I maybe foolishly taught essentially all of my main theoretical papers to MBA students. I had to take the math out and turn it into numbers, but that turned out to be very, very useful as a value add to figuring out how to do useful research. So I wrote papers with a bunch of people here, Rajan, most of them, Anil Kashyap was here, Jigwa He, I think that may be about it. I basically write with a small set of authors, and even for a while I wrote papers by myself. When I wrote papers by myself, I actually needed someone to talk to, so my wife Elizabeth, who's also an economist, who has a University of Chicago PhD, helped me with the math there several times, and that's one of the roles of co-authors is to make sure your math is not totally incorrect. So basically, the University of Chicago had a large part of the credit of my career here. And I basically still enjoy working here, and hope to do it for at least a few more years. And I got Raghu and Yunja He, who's a student and co-author of mine, have a new paper that I was actually hoping to have a Zoom on later this week to get the draft out, but I don't know, it may get pushed back a little bit. So again, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be part of this university.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you to our speakers and Professor Diamond. Thank you very much for your comments. So we're going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes, if we can, taking some questions. And so please, raise your hand, and We'll get a microphone to you if we can, and if not, I'll try to repeat the question. Please. Hey, 1 second there. There we go.
Hello, Karen Jordan, ABC 7. So, Professor, could you just tell us your reaction to the phone call?
I was sound asleep, so my own reaction was trying to figure out where my phone was. So I heard this Swedish voice on there saying, "Are you Professor Doug Diamond, blah, 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 blah." I said, yes. And I did know this was the day that they announced the prize. And I thought it was probably legit, but you never know. I have some friends with good sense of humor. But then they passed it over to Ingrid Werner, who I know very well, and Per Stromberg, who used to actually work here. And if someone could impersonate them as well as they did, they're better than most. So I figured out it was the real thing. And just 2 days ago, I was at a conference at something called the Foundation for Advancement in Research in Financial Economics, in honor of, it was a thing we set up in honor of my thesis advisor, Stephen A. Ross, and had dinner with Phil Dybvig, which I hadn't had post-pandemic, so it was very nice to see him and think all about this. So that was basically my reaction. Oh, not bad, not bad.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, sir. Get a microphone to you if we can, please.
Yes, Professor Dave Roeder from the Chicago Sun-Times. Your work goes back about 40 years, and a lot has happened with the Fed over the last few years, the Great Recession, and now the situation coming out of the pandemic. Do you believe your work has informed much of what the Federal Reserve and the banking system has done since then? And how do you think the Fed has performed?
So let me first say I'm not a monetary economist about inflation and things like that. And let me stick to financial stability. The Fed has done remarkably well in financial stability. Certainly in the period after the Lehman Brothers thing, the Fed did pretty much everything right. One reason was that we were very lucky to have Ben Bernanke as the chair. So Ben, fellow laureate in this, he and I basically had papers coming out roughly at the same time about bank runs. So that was, and he has said that the paper with Phil Dybvig actually is one that is sort of front of mind when people start thinking about crises. The paper, my research is that part of the problem of financial crises occur when something bad happens. There's some uncertainty increase or there's some losses and things like that. But the point of our paper is that once people think the financial system as it's well-structured, a well-structured financial system is very vulnerable to the fear of fear itself, a self-fulfilling prophecy that it might go down. So, and Ben internalized that in his suggestions on policy, and I think sort of central bankers in general have internalized that lesson. So you got to think about what's the initial shock that causes trouble, and that's what you have to deal with to get the economy back. But if you destroy the entire financial system in the meantime, you're going to have a very hard time recovering. So in fact, that was one reason, like the paper with Dybvig, even though there's a fair amount of math in there, that one is written very, very as simply as possible. In fact, Phil and I discussed, we should write this so that the average central banker who's not necessarily an economic theorist can understand it. And I think one reason that paper had some influence, had more influence than it would otherwise, is that the basic structure of what it has is quite simple, and you could give more stories on why some of the things are true, but we just made assumptions about what was the key problem. Said, look, if you borrow short-term and finance with something long-term you can't sell very well, you better be able to keep rolling over that debt or you're dead. That's basically our model in a nutshell. And that's pretty much, apart from saying this is a good thing up front, you want to do this. The hard part of our paper is you want to do that, but the part that central bankers need to know is that that could happen.
Thank you. Other questions, please.
So what is your plan then? How are you going to spend your winnings?
I'm going to buy the total market index portfolio. And maybe I'll keep my portfolio weight, so I won't put 100% in there. That's largely what I'll do. Basically, how much I consume is more constrained by how much time I have than anything else at this stage. Now, maybe it'll change what I do after I retire, but I'm still trying to finish this paper with Rajan and Hook. So.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Did it occur to you, well, this is nice, but why didn't it happen 20 years ago?
No. You don't want to win it too young, right? It sort of goes to your head and things like that. So I'm glad they didn't wait until I was well past my last sale date. So.
Have you talked with your fellow winners?
I have not. I've had a brief text with Phil Divig. And there was a picture of us taken that actually came at 1 in the morning of us taken at this FARFI conference. So we had a text. Someone texted it to the two of us, and then I responded to that text. So that was, in fact, Phil didn't answer his phone this morning, so I got a text from people at the Nobel Committee saying, "Do you know Phil Divig's cell phone number?" And I sent it to him. I said, "No, that's the one we have. He must still be asleep."
It was early.
Yeah.
Yes, let's get a microphone to you if you can, please.
Does this change your thoughts about your work in the intervening years? Does it cast that work in new light?
No, basically, I'm obsessed with this particular topic of financial stability and banks. So 75% of the things I've done since these two papers were trying to think about how to apply them more, or whether some of the stuff that is a little more general makes sense. So one paper is about how banks monitor borrowers and have to finance themselves with debt, and then pretty much they can't share the risk anyway with outsiders anyway except diversification. They can't use too much equity, so that makes it tough to be a bank. And the other one is about assets being illiquid and subject to runs. Most of the stuff I've done since then, all the work with Rajan, is about trying to think about when you put those two ideas together, what do you get? When the bank's assets are illiquid because there's something special the bank is doing, either monitoring the borrower or has some relationship with the borrower. So I don't know. My interests are pretty narrow. I've done some other stuff, but stuff with Robert Verrecchia, who used to be here, that was totally different. It was about pricing of assets. But I don't know. I'm sort of still in this little lane. Although in the last 5 years, the stuff with Rajan and Ho, we're a little outside that lane. Although the newer one is going to get us a little back into this. So we've sort of taken the car off autopilot. I'm trying to steer it back to stuff that I know.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, sir, let's get a microphone to you if we can, please.
Are we going to see more bank runs? Do you see any threats to financial stability today?
Yes. So let me say, we're never going to get, part of the point of the paper part of the point of Diamond Divig is that you can never, it's not good to completely get rid of bank runs. Every so often you want to leave yourself somewhat vulnerable, but not very vulnerable. And then in the extreme cases when confidence breaks down or losses are so extreme, then you need some kind of government or industry-wide intervention. So I think probably post-2008, the regulations of actual commercial banks got so tough that the banking system is actually in reasonably good shape right now, much better shape than it was before 2008. So the other point of Diamond Divig is that these run things are not about being a commercial bank. It's about borrowing short and lending long. Mm-hmm. And then these risks have sort of migrated elsewhere in the economy. When we saw it in the liability-driven institutions in the UK, these have gone elsewhere. So I do see threats to financial stability. And part of this, raising interest rates is sort of another name for withdrawing liquidity from the system, and this thing's called quantitative tightening is definitely withdrawing liquidity from the system. So runs are particularly problematic. Fear of fear itself runs, self-fulfilling prophecy runs, are particularly problematic when there's not much liquidity in the system. So apart from all of the just uncertainty because of like the war in Ukraine and things like that, just the withdrawal of liquidity, I think central bankers have to be careful about the rate at which they withdraw it. Otherwise, they will see, financial crises that tie their hands and prevent them from doing the macroeconomic things they want to do.
Okay. Microphone, if we could hear.
Do you have any comments for people who are using cryptocurrencies and crypto exchanges?
So okay, so you had two parts. Good, I can give you, I was going to say I have a two-part answer, but you asked it in two parts. So cryptocurrency, it's basically a store of value from forced scarcity of something. And much like dollar bills, it's basically a bubble that it only has value because people believe it has value. So bubbles obviously can pop, and we've had hyperinflations, and we see that the only reason that there's value, if people lost value, is if the cryptocurrency was somehow really useful for something that other things are not useful for. So you can't just get away from it. It's great for illegal transactions and things like that, but I think that's part of the demand for things like Bitcoin. And so the clearing parts, the smart contracts parts of things like Ethereum, that's real value. But apart from that, it strikes me as it's a store of value, it's a highly risky one. So it doesn't have much to do with money. And then the second part is things like exchanges or stable coins, like the one that melted down recently, the Luna and the Terra. So basically, the Luna and the Terra were sort of their own version of borrow short, lend long to try to create a fake, safe, and liquid asset. And basically, as long as everybody thought the fake, safe, and liquid asset was a non-fake and was indeed safe and liquid, then the combined value of the cryptocurrencies, Terra and Luna, was really high. But as soon as they thought it wasn't going to be so great, which it clearly wasn't going to be if you just looked at it, when the combined value goes down, then there's a run on the cryptocurrency. So I think the financial system has strong incentives to do this maturity mismatch. They can create liquid assets, and as long as there's not a run, that'll be great. But it's really got to be fine-tuned so there are not too many runs. And I think that particularly if you're selling products to unsophisticated households, individuals, which is what a lot of these crypto exchange things were doing, if they were selling them all to sophisticated businesses or fancy money managers, then you could imagine that only the ones that were well-structured would succeed. But pretty much anything that looks like it might make people a lot of money, they go into. So like if you lent money in the Terra, you got 14% rate of return on Terras. So someone's offering 14% rate of return when interest rates are zero, it's not going to give you a real return that's very high. So that would be my advice, that financial products in the crypto space headed toward households, unsophisticated households, are probably fraudulent. That's probably my best takeaway.
Okay, thank you for that. Any final questions? Okay, well, good. Why don't we, am I missing anybody? No? Are you willing to stick around for a few minutes in case some folks had some questions toward the end?
My pleasure.
Okay, good. Well, again, thank you all for coming today. We're honored to have you here, and we'll look forward. If you do have a question, please come for a photo or any final wrap-up questions. Thank you for joining us.